I walked into this video a boy and I'm coming out a man. Holy crap. Over the last month and a half or so, or since at least since the announcement of the new NVIDIA GPUs, I have been heavily considering buying one and building an entirely new PC from scratch for, I guess, my setup over here. And through a lot of research and playing games with my 4070 Ti now, both in 4K and at 1440, I've ultimately come to the determination that 1440 is probably the best bet for me, given the build that I currently have, which is a 4070 Ti, 32 gigabytes of RAM, a Asus B450F motherboard, and the AMD Ryzen 9 5950X processor. Okay, the monitor that I have right here, okay, this guy right here, is not the best monitor for me to use given my situation. You see, I made this mistake, right? I went out into the world, found this monitor, I believe, at a Best Buy as a 4K 20-inch monitor, 60 hertz refresh rate, at like, I think 350 bucks at the time. It was on sale. And I'm like, oh my God, this is going to be a premium gaming monitor experience. And now what happens as a result is I have, from what I believe, a very solid gaming PC to play games on, bottlenecked by a monitor that doesn't really help me out when it comes to video games. So what did I do? I bought a 1440p monitor and it's on its way today. It arrives tonight. In anticipation of this monitor coming in, I played Final Fantasy VII Rebirth at 4K on my 4K monitor and at 1440 on my 4K monitor. And what I found, well, are a couple of different interesting little things. Number one, playing the game at 4K, I was able to hit about 55 to 60 frames a second when I'm just out and about exploring the world. Okay, especially in Nibelheim. In Nibelheim, I was 58 to 60. Once we got into the grasslands open world area, things dipped down a little bit more to around like the 50 to 58, 55 range, okay? When we got into combat in the grasslands, in the open world, I found that my FPS dropped as low as 46 frames a second. In those two, I guess, scenarios, I'll tell you the fluctuations in the frame rate hasn't been that noticeable except for when it dropped to 46 in the middle of combat. But then I thought to myself, well, hey, if I switch over to 1440, I should see a better improvement, or at the very least, because I'm playing on a monitor that is capped at 60 at a 60 hertz refresh rate, I'm not going to push beyond 60 frames a second at the very least. It's going to stay right there. I should at least be able to hit 60 a lot more consistently. But that's not what happened. You see, what actually ended up happening is I got pretty much the same exact level of performance. And I was genuinely confused. What in the world is happening? How is it that my performance is relatively the same when I'm playing in 4K and 1440 on the same exact monitor? Now, granted, I understand 60 hertz refresh rate. I'm not going to be able to push anything beyond that. But I figured at the very least at 1440 with all the other settings staying the same, that I'd be able to push 55 to 60, 58 to 60 a lot more consistently. And it didn't happen. I didn't get any drops as massive as down to 46 FPS, but the fluctuations were still there. And so, of course, being the, I guess, studious person that I try to be, I went on the internet and did more research. And here's what I found. Did you know that RAM plays an important part, or some part at least, in your game's performance? Did you also know that I upgraded my PC two different times after I initially purchased it in 2016? Did you know that the first time I upgraded it from a 1070 to a 2070 Super, got a new motherboard, got a new processor. The second time that I upgraded my computer, I went from a 2070 Super to a 4070 Ti and went from an older AMD processor to the Ryzen 9 5950X, right? That's what I did. But did you notice anything that I did not do? If your answer to that question is you didn't upgrade your RAM, then that's correct. That's what I did not do. I had been using the same 4 sticks of RAM that came with this computer when I purchased it back in 2016. Did you also know that ideally you should use 2 sticks for your RAM solutions instead of 4? I didn't know that. So what did I do? Well, I went ahead and bought new RAM. It's DDR4, okay? And I went with the Corsair Vengeance 232 gig sticks for a total of 64 gigs. So I went from 32 gigs to 64 gigs. And the speed for these guys, and please, y'all, I'm like still learning about this stuff, right? Because this is I kind of want to make more content like this. Still learning here, but I believe this is at a 2800 hertz speed, whatever that is. I'll probably put some more technical terminology down here. So I install that. I replug everything to my computer. Thank God I didn't short it out, because if you don't know, I have a carpet underneath me right now. And I'm sitting there just sweating bullets trying to not statically discharge into my computer. So once that's over, I go ahead and crank up Final Fantasy VII Rebirth last night. And let me tell you how that went. There's a section in the Shinra 8 boat on the way to Costa del Sol where you play through a Queen's Blood tournament. And at the very last match, you're playing against, I think her name is Regina. Okay. You go up to Regina, you got to walk from like the front deck of the ship up some stairs through like a parade of people celebrating and cheering you on. And at 4K, my frames dropped to 28 FPS walking up to the steps because there's just a massive amount of people on screen at one time. This is prior to installing the new RAM, okay? When I installed the new RAM, I was able to reload that same exact scenario and walked up the steps again. And this time I was hitting about 38 FPS. Then I switched it again over to 1440. And at 1440, I was at around the 50-ish range of FPS walking up the stairs and getting in front of all of these people, at which point I just went ahead and played the match and ended up whooping her after multiple retries. So right now, where I'm at with everything is I'm literally just here waiting for this monitor to arrive, at which point I'll tell you which one it is. We'll get it all set up, we'll hook it up, and I'm hoping that I can get I have to play at 1440, which I'm okay with because I think 1440 looks great. At 1440 with 180 hertz refresh rate, I'm hoping I can push beyond 60 frames a second and just have a good looking, smooth gameplay experience. So I'll check back in once everything arrives. And by everything, I mean one box. Thinking back on it, if I had to define this conundrum in simpler terms, I would say my big question was, do I upgrade my GPU or do I upgrade my monitor? And then within that question, as far as the monitors are concerned, do I stick with 4K or do I go with 1440? Well, I went with a monitor upgrade and I went with a 1440p monitor. And as a matter of fact, it just got here. This right here is the Ultra Gear 27GS60QC curved 1440p monitor by LG with a 180 hertz refresh rate, and it is a 27-inch screen. I'm gonna open it up. I'm gonna take down this guy right here and the other one and set this up, and then let's see if I made a good decision or not. Voila, it's set up, it's connected. I've got my new LG curved 1440p monitor right here. I can't remember the model number, but you know which one I'm talking about, right? And I've got my old Samsung monitor right here on my left now in a horizontal shape. I'm still debating on getting basically the non-curved version of this here on the left, but I think I'm going to keep it like this for now. The only thing left to do now is to crank on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and see what in the world happens now. All right, so starters here. This still looks fantastic to me. I feel like it looks just as good. Let's look at our frame rates here. What are we running so far? Now, granted, this is off of the NVIDIA app, so I'm not really sure how accurate this is. 61, 65, 72, 86, 94, 71, 66, 59. This is very nice so far. This isn't really telling though, because it can fluctuate here as we move around places depending on how many people are on site. All right, Aerith, Red 13, and Barrett here just walking by. If I really want to get an idea as to how this is going to perform, then we're going to have to go ahead and progress here in the story and get into some combat. But so far, the lowest I've seen is 53, and that's here and there. 64% GPU usage, it just spiked up to 96. But I haven't noticed a single stutter yet, which is pretty darn cool. I'm going to play for a bit, and then I'll be back with more.
do it right. I got your number.
The lowest frame rate I hit just now was 100. 100 FPS in combat. In the middle of combat, the lowest I hit was 100. It looks beautiful. It runs incredibly smoothly. I have never ever played at such high frame rate. And I don't think I can ever go back. That was literal buttery smooth gameplay. I walked into this video a boy and I'm coming out a man. Holy crap. Well, I guess we got to test it a little bit more. So the only other concern that I had regarding this change was, how's my PlayStation 5 going to look on it? Because I do play some games on PS5. And although I'm not too concerned about visuals or frame rates, I don't know what this is going to look like on a 1440 monitor because I've been playing it at 4K. And most of the games are checkerboard or upscaled to 4K or something or other, but I've never experienced PS5 at 1440. So I guess we're going to do that next. And then I'm going to come back to PC and try this out on Cyberpunk and see where we go from there. But I think I've learned something massive today that I should have learned at the very least the last time I upgraded my components, and cover that as soon as we're done. Okay, so it turns out that for some reason or other, whenever I use the PlayStation 5 with this monitor and considering it's connected to my Elgato HD60S Plus, when you go into the PlayStation, at first, I wasn't able to change the resolution to 1440. And so I went ahead and tried playing some of The Witcher, and it looked great. It looked very clear. As a matter of fact, I feel like it looked sharper at 4K on this 1440 display as opposed to how it looked at 4K on my Samsung 4K display. It turns out, though, that you are able to get it to pass through a 1440 signal, and in order to do so, you have to go into 4K Capture Utility and change one of the settings. I think it's called the EDID input setting, and you set it to display, and at that point, the PlayStation should recognize that you've got a 1440 display connected to it. So I went ahead and did that, and it worked, and I was able to set it to 1440 and have it recognize that I've got a 1440 display. I cranked on The Witcher 3 again, and I'm going to be very honest with y'all. I didn't notice a difference at all. To me, it looked just as sharp and just as clear as it did when I was running it at 4K on this 1440 display. Now, one big issue that I did experience here, and it's got nothing to do with the monitor, is that for some reason I cannot get OBS to pick up the capture card's signal anymore at all. And there's a couple of things I still have to try out, but as of right now, I can't do it. And that's kind of important to me because I do record gameplay footage. I'm in the process of getting the platinum trophy for The Witcher 3, and I've been recording a humongous portion of the gameplay. I'm literally at the end stages now. So I know there's a way. I will figure it out. But right now, if you're a content creator and thinking about possibly getting a 1440 display, this might be an issue that you run into. But besides Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on PC, and seeing the amazing performance that we got out of that, and besides its ability to handle the PlayStation 5, I had to test it on Cyberpunk 2077. There's just no way I can make a video like this and not test it on one of the most graphically demanding games to date. So in the first benchmark test that I did for Cyberpunk 2077, of course, I've got it running at 1440, every possible setting, graphical setting, at its maximum value. Chromatic aberration and motion blur, of course, turned off. VSync was turned off. I set the maximum frame rate cap at 120, and ray tracing and path tracing were both turned on. Frame generation and dynamic resolution scaling were both off, and they'll be off for every benchmark that I'm about to go through here. And in that specific benchmark, I didn't even break 30 FPS on average at all. It looked beautiful, but yeah, not even 30. So the next thing that I did is I went ahead and turned off path tracing just to see how much of a difference that does. And I believe with path tracing off, we were able to break 30 FPS on average, but just barely. I'm like, huh, okay. I go over to the display settings and basically I end up finding out that I needed to turn VSync on and I set it to 180 to match my display. I turned off ray tracing altogether, and any of the settings that were set in ultra or at psycho, I brought them down to high. And in doing so, I was able to hit about 89.7, I think it is, average frames a second at 1440. And sometimes it even peaked at well over 100 frames. And it looked gorgeous, and I could visually tell that it was just running so freaking smoothly. And the craziest thing about this experience so far has been that although ray tracing makes things look really pretty, it's like non-consequential because like screen space reflections, I think it's called, the reflections that you see off of a puddle of water, for example, you can sit there and stare at it and it's going to look nice, but it's only going to look nice while you're there staring at it. And when you're playing a game, especially something like Cyberpunk 2077, you're not stopping and looking at a puddle too often. Every now and then, of course, but they're just so inconsequential that it I felt like the game looked just as good with ray tracing turned off and with path tracing turned off. And yeah, I'm a believer now, dude. Abso-freaking-lutely. So what does this all mean? Well, I guess originally, and I did a poor job of explaining this at the beginning of the video, but ultimately, my initial question was, do I upgrade my GPU, which would have resulted in an entirely new build, or do I upgrade my monitor? And I know it sounds weird to say upgrade when you consider that I went from a 4K display to a 1440 display, but the 4K display, in all honesty, was not a display made for gaming. And gaming, okay, gaming is a term attached to so many products more often than not just to drive the price up. Okay, let's be real about that. Gaming headsets, for example, have their pros and cons, but when it comes to audio, you'll get better audio from non-gaming headsets, right? Gaming microphones, what the is that? Anyways, I digress. But when it comes to displays, to monitors, I think it actually makes sense to label one as a gaming monitor and another one as not a gaming monitor. And my Samsung 4K monitor is not a gaming monitor. So I consider it an upgrade because I get higher refresh rate, I get a nice curved screen, HDR10, and 1440p, which I think is a fantastic middle ground resolution. From those questions, then you can kind of spiral out and go further into the rabbit hole. Is it better to play 1440 on a 4K display, or is it better to play 1440 on a 1440 display? And I got answers for every single one of those. First of all, 1440 on a 4K display, as far as performance was concerned, when I was trying it out with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I wasn't getting any sort of differences in performance. Marginal at best, a few extra frames a second here and there, and nothing more. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that that monitor was a 60 hertz monitor, and I wasn't able to push the system to go beyond 60 frames a second. Not that I was approaching that, it is more around a 55, okay? And now having a 1440 display, running the games at 1440, I can immediately tell, especially with Rebirth, I broke 100 frames a second in the middle of combat. Granted, it was in a somewhat controlled scene, part of the game, but still a lot of flashy animations, a lot of animations going on. It just felt so buttery smooth, bro. Like, I get it now. I absolutely get it. Which now brings me to the first question I initially posed. Do I upgrade my GPU or do I upgrade my monitor? And in this instance, having a 4070 Ti and upgrading to 5070 Ti, for example, financially would not have made sense whatsoever. I feel like I've gotten the performance I've been wanting to get from gaming in just upgrading my RAM and getting a monitor that is suited to my build. If you find yourself in a similar position and you're wondering, wow, I feel like I can crank out I feel like I can squeeze more juice out of my build, but I don't know exactly what to do. Do I need to go spend money on a new GPU? You probably don't, especially if you're on the previous generation of GPUs. If you're an older generation before that, then maybe it might be worth it. But if you're still in the 4000 series of cards, you might want to look into other aspects of your build, your monitor for sure, your display 100%. And in my case, my RAM. That was, I can't believe, I'm embarrassed. I told somebody at work that I did not upgrade my RAM since I bought the build originally in 2016. And it was kind of embarrassing. It's kind of crazy that I did not even think to do that. So I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I have enjoyed doing this. If you want more content around this kind of tech, I'm trying to broaden my horizons this year in 2025. Let me know in the comments below because I'd be happy to do more because I have a lot more we can come up with and cook in the kitchen this year. So the next time, be good to yourselves, be good to one another. Peace out.